There are chapters of human history many never learn, hidden layers, misunderstood events, and turning points that few people ever stop to question. This story does not begin with hashtags, parades, or political debates. It stretches far beyond modern times, deep into centuries shaped by empires, religions, science, and societies that defined how human beings understood themselves and the world around them. This is the truth no one dares to explain about LGBTQ history. To understand the roots of this topic, we must first look at ancient human societies. Historical evidence suggests that same-sex acts and affection existed in multiple ancient cultures, though they were understood very differently from how we define them today. In ancient Rome, for example, relationships between men were recorded in historical texts. These relationships were often connected to status, power, mentorship, or social hierarchy, rather than personal identity. Figures such as Antinous, the companion of Emperor Hadrian, were even honored after death, showing that such relationships were not always hidden, but they were also not seen as defining who a person was. Across other regions of the world, including parts of Asia and the Middle East, same-sex attraction appears in rock art, poetry, and early writings. These references reveal something important. Human behavior has always been diverse, but the idea of fixed sexual identities is largely a modern development that emerged only in the last 2 centuries. For most of history, people were not categorized by their sexuality. There were no identity labels, no movements, and no global narratives built around attraction. Sexual behavior existed, but sexuality as identity did not. As civilizations developed, religion became the central authority shaping morality, law, and social norms. Faith traditions provided structure to societies and clear guidelines for personal and communal life. In Islamic history, attitudes towards same-sex relations shifted over time. During the Islamic Golden Age, poetry and literature sometimes referenced same-sex desire, particularly in elite cultural circles. Poets such as Abu Nuwas wrote openly about these themes, indicating that such expressions existed within certain historical contexts. In later centuries, interpretations became stricter. Conservative movements in the 18th and 19th centuries emphasized moral boundaries more strongly, and religious authorities enforced harsher penalties for same-sex acts based on their understanding of Scripture. In Christian-influenced societies, teachings from the Old and New Testaments were traditionally interpreted as prohibiting same-sex relations, while emphasizing marriage, family structure, and procreation. Over time, these interpretations became embedded in law, shaping social attitudes across medieval and early modern Europe. Same-sex acts were often criminalized, and punishments could be severe. Judaism also developed strong legal traditions that discouraged same-sex relations, prioritizing divine law, lineage, and family continuity. While many Orthodox and conservative communities maintained these views, some Jewish movements in the 20th century began offering more inclusive interpretations and ordaining LGBTQ clergy. Across all these religions, a common pattern appeared. Moral judgment focused on behavior, while human dignity was considered sacred. However, in practice, societies often failed to separate actions from individuals, leading to stigma and exclusion. For most of human history, same-sex attraction did not give rise to public political movements. That began to change in the late 19th century. In 1897, the Scientific Humanitarian Committee was founded in Berlin, becoming one of the first organizations to advocate for homosexual rights within legal systems. Around the same time, early thinkers such as Karl Heinrich Ulrichs began writing about same-sex attraction using early terminology long before modern labels existed. These efforts were small, cautious, and often hidden. Social stigma and legal risk made open discussion dangerous. In the 20th century, activism became more organized. During the 1950s, groups like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis worked quietly to build community, reduce stigma, and challenge discrimination. Then came a turning point. On June 28, 1969, a police raid on a bar in New York City triggered protests that would later be known as the Stonewall Riots. This event did not create same-sex attraction, but it transformed visibility. It marked the moment when LGBTQ identity moved from private spaces into public awareness. After this, activism expanded rapidly. Demonstrations grew larger, organizations multiplied. Media attention increased. What had once been localized efforts became a global movement centered on visibility, political advocacy, and identity. The following decades brought both momentum and hardship. During the 1970s and 1980s, pride marches appeared, symbols like the rainbow flag were introduced, and advocacy organizations formed across cities and countries. But this period was also marked by tragedy. In the 1980s, the AIDS crisis emerged as a devastating public health emergency. It disproportionately affected gay men and exposed deep social stigma, fear, and misinformation. Governments were slow to respond, and communities were often left to care for themselves. Grassroots activism rose sharply, demanding medical research, treatment, and basic compassion. Legal progress came slowly and unevenly across the world. Some countries decriminalized homosexuality. Others introduced anti-discrimination laws. Later came recognition of partnerships and, in certain regions, marriage equality. Each step forward was often met with resistance, cultural, political, and religious. By the early 21st century, awareness of LGBTQ identities expanded dramatically, especially through media, education, and political discourse. Terms like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer became widely recognized. This visibility sparked intense debate. Some societies welcomed these changes, viewing them as progress toward inclusion and equal rights. Others emphasized traditional values rooted in religion, family structure, and cultural continuity. At its core, this tension reflects two different ways of understanding identity. One approach centers on self-definition, the belief that identity comes from within and must be affirmed by society. The other is grounded in historical, cultural, and religious frameworks, where identity is shaped by moral boundaries, community, and divine law. This is not simply a disagreement about sexuality. It is a disagreement about how societies define truth, morality, and the limits of individual freedom. Many religious communities fear the erosion of long-held values and pressure to abandon deeply held beliefs. Many LGBTQ individuals fear rejection, discrimination, and invisibility. Both experiences exist. Both are real. History teaches us something important. Same-sex behavior has existed across civilizations. Major religions shaped moral frameworks for centuries, but modern LGBTQ movements, as public and political identity movements, are relatively recent. Understanding this evolution does not require agreement. It requires context. When history is ignored, discussions become emotional and divided. When history is understood, conversations become calmer, deeper, and more human. This story is not about deciding who is right or wrong. It is about understanding how we arrived at this moment in time, because societies do not change overnight. They change slowly, until one day the world feels completely different, and history, whether we acknowledge it or not, always shapes the future.